Hey everybody, welcome to Pianist Academy. I am Charles Szczepanek. It's great to see so many of you here. So glad you could make it. We have Rhodesy in the chat, I see, and XZY. Hello, hello, and we have a bunch of other people here as well. I'm so glad because this is not exactly our usual time. So thanks for tuning in. And if you haven't said hello in the chat, Dith, welcome Dith and Bedlington Groomer. Awesome. If you haven't said hello in the chat, drop a hi in the chat and let us know where you're tuning in from, especially if it's your first time. Bethany, welcome. Snowy New Hampshire. That sounds actually really lovely. I love wintertime. Yes, so Dith, you said every other Wednesday already. Well, hey, Jason. So this is kind of what my good friend Cecil used to call a pop-up stream. Because usually we do these the second and fourth Wednesdays of the month, and that's what is on my channel homepage. This is obviously not the second Wednesday of the month. But I am traveling to perform next week, and so and then the 2 weeks later, the fourth Wednesday of the month is only 2 days after Christmas. So I thought I didn't want the whole month to go by and not see any of you. So I thought we'd move them this month to the first Wednesday and the third Wednesday. So welcome, and I'm glad there are so many of you here. I guess that'll be our news to kick off the stream today, is that the next stream will be 2 weeks from today, the third Wednesday of the month, whatever day that happens to be. 2 weeks from today. So let's see. Nadia, hello, Nadia. Belgium, wonderful, wonderful. Is it snowy in Belgium, Nadia? Rosie says, tuning in from a cold bus stop. I hope you get where you're going soon, Rhodesy. Jason from Huntsville, Alabama. Dith in northern Michigan. I know a couple people in northern Michigan. How far north are you, Dith? I know some people way, I can't remember the name of the town, but it's very near the border. And the snow starts early. Donna, welcome, Donna. Idaho. And Nancy, hello, Nancy. Awesome. Great to see everybody. So sometimes, we have these streams and we have submissions, and for masterclass segments, there are no submissions this week. So that means the entire session is completely open to all of your questions. So I'm looking forward to hearing what you'd like to talk about. Your wish is my command, we could say. Rhodesy, thanks. Rhodesy says, your laugh is iconic. I'll take that as a compliment. Awesome. Dith, yeah, that's probably the town. That's way up there, yeah. And Bedlington Groomer says, used to live 4 minutes from you, and now we're in Pittsburgh. So far away. Dith passed your test. So, Dith, you're talking about your exam that you were playing. Let's see, the farmer, the piece about the farmer, right? And some Clementi. Beautiful. Did you get your score, and did you get any comments? Let us know. Or was it just a pass or not pass? I'm not sure. The different testing works in different ways. But yeah, let's give Dith a round of applause. RCM4. Yeah, absolutely. Good job, Dith. And thanks for submitting as you were getting prepared for that. That was great to hear you. Beautiful. Okay. Absolutely. Let's drop some questions in the chat. Let's get things rolling. I'll give you a few minutes to think of something if you don't have something. And if no one has a question, well, we'll figure out what to talk about. But before I start on a tangent, because sometimes I can go 20 minutes on a subject, let me hear what all of you would like to talk about today. And the flannel's back. Was that Dith? Dith, were you talking about the flannel the last couple of weeks? The flannel's back because it's cold. See, Rhodesy has sent me a short piece, a 2-page piece of music called a cantabile that Rhodesy wrote, I think this past week. And so you're asking, why is that piece that you wrote intermediate? And why did I call it intermediate when you thought it was a beginner piece? Rhodesy, did you happen to look at the other score that I sent to you via email? Because that would really sum it up. It's just the amount of notes. There's kind of a lot, but the distance we have to travel. Beginner music, Rhodesy, usually stays within a very, very, almost like one hand position at the keyboard. Okay, so if your left hand has to move to find chords, it's no longer beginner. If it has to move maybe to play a few notes here and there, or to do something very simple like breaking a triad and then playing the 4 chord and this, that is already late beginner, and that's not leaping octaves or more. And then trills, definitely not beginner anymore if you have trills in a piece. Anything that has arpeggios that need to happen at a relatively quick pace, not beginner anymore. So Rhodesy, the piece I sent you via email is a great example. That was The Soldier's March by Schumann is a great example of a late beginner piece of music. Another one for everybody just to know as an intermediate piece, a good representation of intermediate level would be Chopin's famous waltz in A. D sharp, there it is. So we all know that piece. There is one arpeggio in the B section, right? And that makes that piece far more challenging. That's usually the spot people have the most trouble with. That falls right in the middle of intermediate repertoire, usually about level 5, I think, RCM. So Rhodesy, I hope that answers your question about that. Let's see, Dith, we have great questions. So Dith has a question, Nadia has a question. Encryption. Nadia, can you, okay. Thank you for clarifying that. I'm going to hit Dith's question first, and then we're going to talk a little bit about Nadia's question. So Dith asked, how about some advice for an early intermediate starting with a piece from scratch? Good question, Dith. If you haven't picked your repertoire yet, first of all, oh, thanks, Dith. By the way, you said that's RCM 6, the Chopin waltz. Great. I was only off by one level. I believe 6, 7, 5, 6, 7, I believe are intermediate levels, maybe 8. I think 8 is the first advanced level. Okay, so Dith, advice for an early piece, starting from scratch. If you haven't yet picked your music and you're an early intermediate player, especially a lot of people that I know that tune in on this channel are, you're playing for fun, really, right? Be sure you listen to a lot of selections before you pick what you want to work on. The last couple streams we've had, we've talked about how long sometimes we can spend on a piece of music, right? And it's really important to enjoy the music that you choose to work on, because by the time we get to mid-intermediate level music, we're probably spending at least a few months on a single piece of music, practicing it every day. And so you really have to enjoy it. So first things first, when you have that opportunity to choose new repertoire, so Dith, you're in the RCM's exam track, let's say. RCM publishes their entire list of repertoire that fits in each category that you can test with. And it's something I use all the time to help pick repertoire for students. And there's a kind of a condensed version. You can find the PDF of the syllabus anywhere online. I don't know if they've updated it for 2023, but the 2022 version is great. And there's a condensed version that has about 10 pieces per time period. Rhodesy, real quick, RCM is Royal Conservatory of Music, and it's their exam, let's say their grading system for music, along with exams that you can take and say you have to learn certain things, not only about performance, but about theory and also about music history at some point, and terminology and things like that. And then you show proficiency in that. And you can pass a level of RCM. There's also technical requirements like scales, knowing certain scales, certain keys, arpeggios, cadence patterns, chord patterns, and being able to execute those at a variety of tempi in different rhythms. The more advanced you get, the more requirements there are, and the more difficult they are, of course. Technical, repertoire, theory, history, all that jazz. So diff, you said you're looking at it now, yeah. So there's a condensed version of a few, let's say, most recommended, or maybe even, sometimes I think of them as some of the most important pieces of the period are listed right at the beginning of the syllabus. But then, if you go a few pages later, each level, you get a massive selection of repertoire that fits. And if you really want to take time and listen to stuff, it would take days or weeks to listen to all of the selections. So you might start by looking for composers you recognize in the list, listening through those particular pieces of music, and going from there. But I would definitely listen first. So tying all of this back up, listen first, pick something that you really enjoy the sound of and that you enjoy playing. And then as you're preparing for an exam and you have to pick from different periods, but also even if you're not, even if you're just playing for fun and you're learning some rep, I would always suggest learning some things in a few different styles. So good morning, OCD King. So that would mean something like if you're playing a slow lyrical piece and that you love that one and you've chosen that first, I would, for a second piece, pick something that's more sprightly, more energetic, has probably more scales, depending on the level, Alberti bass, things like that. One of my students right now, as I was coaching them through, they're getting ready for RCM level 8, and they're playing a Scriabin prelude, which is very beautiful and slow and lyrical, and then also Mozart's C major. That one. That ticks 2 boxes for us, which is really great. And we're going to work on 2 very different types of technique, playing those from those different composers in those different time periods. And you can continue to extrapolate that. Well, I'll just mention this in case there's somebody here that is considering, say, applying to music school. That becomes even more important when you get to that stage and professional musician beyond. Yeah. I won't go any further unless somebody has a particular question about that. Diff, one more thing, because let me give you some practice advice too. So that was just about listening and choosing rep to make sure we can stick with it for the complete amount of time that we're going to need to. The second thing, don't feel like you have to learn all of the notes really quickly, or all of the notes. I think you take lessons from an in-person teacher. Don't feel like you have to present an entire piece at your first lesson. I would much rather, if you have a piece of music that's 32 bars, let's just say 32 bars long, learn the first 8 and spend some nice, good focused practice time learning the first 8. Hands separate, hands together, pull apart all of the little components, make sure we know the melody versus the accompaniment, harmony. How exactly we go through that process is going to be a little different for each piece, and how deep we need to go is going to be a little different for each piece. But I would much rather, from a teacher's perspective, I would much rather work with you on 8 bars that you've had time to get comfortable with than hear 32 bars where we're struggling through all of it. So your teacher is going to be a lot more helpful for you with that kind of preparation. You're also going to find that, I like to say that certain music, all music really, especially composers, have certain idioms that they write in. For example, Clementi feels and sounds like Clementi. Mozart feels and sounds like Mozart. Go more advanced, Rachmaninoff feels and sounds like Rachmaninoff, right? And when we learn the idiom of the composer and the idiom of the piece, how they're using the hands and the playing mechanism to execute things, the rest is going to start flowing much more easily. So that's the second reason. Take a lot of time and just learn that beginning chunk. If you do that and you really learn what the composer is asking you, the rest of the pieces, you're actually going to learn it faster than if you tried to kind of take all of it and work on it all equally. So there you go. Those are my 2 tips for you, Dith. Beautiful. We have some more people that have tuned in. Scott Weaver, hello. And let's see, Jess, hello, and Jack. Let me go back to Nadia's question. Nadia said, can you explain the origin of, and you're saying, I think the C is in common time, 4/4 time? Because Nadia, C means 4/4. You said that later. Yeah. So let's think a little bit about early music and notational practices. For a long time, the first music that was notated, I don't think the ancient Greeks notated any music. I think it was all passed on by oral tradition. Renaissance and earlier, let's say Gregorian chant especially, chant in the church, was notated on a staff that had 4 lines, and it used something called square notation. You can find examples of that if you look online. And this is also a bit of where the modes that we play in come from. We don't talk about that a whole lot, especially as pianists anymore. But the modes that ancient music were written in, if we call it that. So I'm talking about music starting from about 900 AD. Very often they weren't written in a meter. There would be no meter written on the page. The square notation would show pitch, show pitch and rhythm, but in a different way than we're used to seeing today. And so as notation became more and more codified, things began to be written in a similar feel. So the feel of rhythm that became what we know as 4/4 today was the most common. So feeling a 1, 2, and a steady pulse that repeats like that. When we talk about, Edith, you're saying very loose with meter. Chant is very loose with meter. And as soon as we progress from chant into polyphony, choral polyphony, where the original chant, the cantus firmus, was taken and it was expanded upon, all of a sudden we get these really ornamented vocal lines that all move around the main melody, which moves so slowly you almost can't even hear it. You can't even decipher what it is anymore. But all of those other moving parts, the most common time they were written in was 4/4. So 4/4 became, over the course of hundreds of years, common time. And anything that wasn't in 4/4, when that started to happen, we'd get a time signature. So common time, 4/4, that's a bit of background about why that exists. You don't see that very often written on sheet music anymore. More often than not, you're going to see 4/4 listed rather than common time, unless you're looking at older publications. But the more modern ones, that's very rarely do you see it, unless it's an urtext from a composer's manuscript, and they used common time, which of course, if you've looked at composers' manuscripts, they all liked to save time while they wrote, and so there's a lot of scribbling, and a C is a lot easier to write than 2 4s. It takes a lot more time. I know that's... Yeah. So Nadia, great question. Brilliant. I love all the questions we've gotten. I'm going to go through them in order, so please be patient with me. Let's see. Bedlington Grimmer had the next question, and you asked, what is the best advice you can give to adults starting out in piano? I think that would come down to have patience. Have patience and trust the process. If you can get a teacher, because if you have a good teacher, you're going to progress much faster and more efficiently, and things are going to make a lot more sense much more quickly. If you're not interested in that, that's fine. There are so many resources like this one, like this stream, out there online that are free and are available, and there are a lot that are very good. There are a lot that aren't very good. So, use your best judgment. But overall, be patient, because I think one of the things that strikes me the most working with a lot of adult students is that we're all very good, let's say adults in general, you're all very good at whatever you do for work, whatever you have done for work, whatever you've specialized in, whatever you've spent a lot of time learning, studying, doing, etc., right? And I think the further away we get from, let's say, school age, high school, college, etc., the further away we get from that, the less time we usually spend learning completely foreign and completely new things. We might learn things that are related to what we do all the time, but they're still related. And learning piano, if you haven't learned a musical instrument before, learning the piano or learning any instrument it presents some very unique challenges, mental challenges, auditory challenges, and physical motor skill challenges. So we have to be really patient with the process, because as long as it would have taken when you were 12 years old, let's say, or 14, it's for sure going to take at least that amount of time to develop the muscle coordination. And what we don't always remember is that when we're younger, we have a different perception about how time flows, right? An hour when we're younger, sometimes it feels like it takes forever to get through an hour, or to get through an hour of practice, or so on and so on, right? But we don't always remember that. Let's say if you took piano lessons from the age 10 through 14, you took lessons for 4 years, and maybe you practiced an hour a day for 4 years, and you progressed, I don't know, 3 or 4 levels in that amount of time. As an adult, 4 years from, let's say, 60, if we start at age 60, 4 years feels a whole lot different than from 10 to 14, right? And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that we have gotten used to kind of being experts in everything that we do. So trust the process and have patience, and know that even when you don't see progress, every day that you put in the work, there is progress being made. It just comes slowly. It comes slowly. It's like watching yourself in a mirror, right? You don't see the changes from day to day to day, but you absolutely, when you look at photos from 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, you can see all those changes. And the same thing happens with piano. So be patient. Great question, Bedlington Groomer. Let's see. Nancy earlier had said you spent part of yesterday watching Taubman approach videos. Do I have any comment on that? I'm a big fan of the Taubman approach. I don't think. Let's say this. I'm a huge fan of keeping the body in alignment and using the body the most efficient way that we possibly can at the instrument. I was just talking with another student about this. But one of the core principles of a Taubman approach, since I haven't spent any time at the piano, we're going to talk a little bit about that while I answer this question. One of the core principles is about keeping alignment in the fingers, the hand, the wrist, and the arm. And when things stay in alignment, one, we're far less prone to injury, and two, it actually makes playing a whole lot easier. I'm going to talk about actually the 4th and 5th fingers, because a lot of times we think of those as the least strong. They have the least strength, but that's not true. That's not true. They might have the least independence because they share a tendon in the upper arm. But strength is... Playing the piano doesn't require great strength. One great pedagogue of piano, Newhouse, said that a 4-year-old child has all the strength you need to play great pieces of repertoire at the piano. It doesn't take a lot of strength. It just takes coordination in the right way. Okay, so when we talk about alignment, it's very easy. Let's move down here. Oh, I'll stay up here. Okay, this will be easier to show you. This is the C above middle C. Oh, let's move to a different key. How about D major? D above middle C, F sharp, A. Whenever we place our hand in a typical 5-finger position, right, all of these fingers are nicely aligned with the body. Let's say we ask the left hand to do the same thing, and we're asking it to play in the same octave. Immediately, we can see that there's a massive problem, because this shape in the wrist is going to be detrimental to us. It's not very efficient. We're asking the hand to do things under tension, because turning the hand this way creates tension, right? Simple way to fix this is to lean our body to the right. And the further we lean, I have to lean away from the mic, but the further we lean, the more in alignment that hand becomes. So you see, as I lean back to the mic to talk, it's an awful shape, and then I lean to the right. Much more alignment. Alignment is this straight line from the forearm down through the fingers. Yeah? Let's say now we have a chord to play, or an arpeggio to play. Let's say we have, so maybe, yeah, let's talk about something that big. We have to play chords that are an octave very often, right? We need to be really careful that as we play and approach the piano, that this stretch, we have to incorporate that stretch, but we don't hold on to it, because that stretch is misalignment, right? We keep this centered between the hands. In fact, who mentioned the Chopin method? Rhodesy mentioned the Chopin method. Okay, the anchor point of the hand, switch back cameras, the anchor point of the hand is, I consider, between the second and the third finger. That's like our pivot point. So if our wrist and our forearms stay aligned with that point, we're in the best possible position. However, if we need to play an arpeggio, as we play that arpeggio, the wrist and the hand is going to, the arm is going to help align our wrist to be in line and behind the finger that's currently being used. So 1, 2 is in alignment, 3 is in alignment. If we go up to 5, 5 is in alignment, right? I said I was going to talk about 4, 5, so let's talk about that. Let's say we have to play something like that. This might be the end of a melodic phrase, starting with E on the third finger, F sharp with 4, G sharp with 5. Okay, a very common approach would be to leave the hand wherever it was and just stretch 4 and 5 up, right? And this is going to cause 2 problems. 1, we have a lot less control over 4 and 5 because there isn't that alignment behind them. And there's also the possibility that in creating this shape, if we haven't relaxed the muscles, especially enough during playing, this creates extra tension and then can cause tendon damage and other things like that. So when we need to play 3, 4, 5, instead of stretching like that, notice how the wrist and the hand guide the finger into the key. And they stay in alignment. So not bum bum bum, but ba da dum. Yes? Okay. That's a huge component of Taubman approach to piano, is that alignment. And I'm a big, big fan of that. It makes playing things so much easier and healthier. Yeah? And in fact, again, talking about the Chopin method, one of the, if we think about Opus 10 number 1, Chopin Etude, I don't know how many super advanced pianists there are, but this, going slowly, I'm not warmed up today. Let me show you this from the top down. Because in this piece, this is actually, Chopin wrote this to practice this particular purpose, for this purpose. The stretches of arpeggio are usually a 9th or a 10th or bigger. They're very large. If we try to play the etude with this stretch and then stretch, we're going to fail miserably. We're never going to get it up to tempo, and it's going to be under a lot of tension, right? But if we let the hand relax down to thumb, and then 4, 5, and the wrist walks up, and 4, 5, and the wrist walks up, same thing, wrist stays high and high. High is relative here. Let me show you from the side. that is high wrist. It's not, and it's only for a moment in time as we transition. We're keeping 4 and 5 in alignment. That makes all of those arpeggios possible and a whole lot easier than trying to stretch through all of those. Yeah? So, I'm a big fan of the Taubman approach. I think there are some times where I disagree with it, and it's usually for the sake of learning to play really with a lot of weight and a lot of attack. For example, if you think about somebody playing the beginning of the Tchaikovsky first piano concerto, all of the really big chords, we're never going to be able to sing those and play those out over an orchestra, playing from that place of extraordinary relaxation and like dropping in. We're going to get a very warm sound, and it's going to be beautiful for solo work and recital work. But if we need to play and balance an orchestra, we have to incorporate some other components that are about quick moments of tension and release, and moments of tension and release. XZY said, big hands, the 10th doesn't look hard. At speed, it would be very bad if I tried to play it with a stretch. And I'd be, after 16 measures, I'd have insane burning in the forearm trying to do that. So I can reach the chord, but playing it at speed and doing all of the kind of finger gymnastics that Chopin asked for in that piece it would never happen. It would never happen, let's say. All right. Great. So many questions today. Beautiful. Love it. I'm going back, answering these in order. So let's see. Okay, I found Nancy's last question. That was a great question, Nancy. Thank you, about Taubman approach. Let's see. Dith said there's another Clemente on the list. Pick something else. Yes, Dith. Pick something else. Nadia asked, how can we play faster? How can we play fast? And Bachward's Fellow. Hello, Bachward's Fellow. The key to playing fast, Nadia, is being very, very loose and knowing when and how we can relax while we play. We also need to really know ahead of time. Our mind needs to know ahead of time exactly what we're asking our hands to do. So those are the two most common issues I see with students that are having trouble speeding things up. Let's just take a scale. B major. If we want to learn how to play B major that fast or something like that, we first need to know the chunks, meaning the hand positions. Any passage of music, you can create chunks or hand positions, right? And when we switch from hand position to hand position, we need to really practice exactly where that transition takes place. In a scale, or in a scale-like passage of music, it's going to be a thumb tuck or a finger cross in the opposite direction. So, a thumb tuck. If we practice across the thumb tuck, that's going to end up speeding that up, and then add a note. You can add another note. And then we can end up playing the whole octave. Now, the rest of the fingers, it takes more practice and more control just to be able to play, let's say, a 5-finger pattern very quickly and evenly and precisely. The only thing that's going to help us do that is a lot of time practicing and going slowly enough that we can do that completely freely. Yeah? A lot of times, if we're asked to play something fast or intricate or intense or something like that, we kind of clamp or we tense up. And as soon as we tense the hand because we're worried about it or we think it's going to push us faster, we end up clumping everything together. And it turns into a little bit of a mess. So If that happens to you when you're trying to push faster, back off your dynamic. Yeah, it's always easier to play faster piano than it is to play faster forte. Because piano playing, right, soft playing, only requires a little bit of energy, a little bit of force put into the key. That's a lot easier than playing the same scale forte. You'll also notice, if you watch videos of concert pianists, great concert pianists, whenever possible when they have that fast passage work, and Liszt was a master of writing music like this, whenever you have that fast passage work, it's usually played softer, and the composer usually writes it to be played softer. So a lot of those really sparkly or magical sounding passages in great Lisztian repertoire, they're piano and pianissimo. When they're not, they're extraordinarily difficult. But Liszt was a master of writing music. I'm not saying it's not hard. A lot of his music is very hard. But he was a master of writing music that was easier to play than it looks and sounds. So we can learn something from that. Yes, he was crafting music for himself to perform, to wow people. Well, he did it by a lot of times writing that really fast passage work softly. And it's also usually written in a way, except in his most difficult pieces, it's usually written in a way that brings the fingers together, right? Which anytime the hand can release from expansion and back to neutral, those are all points that we get to reset and relax before we re-engage the mechanism. So all of those things aid. We can add those to any of the other things that we're practicing. So knowing that we can, when we play a scale up 4 notes, if I show you from the top, as soon as I make that transition, look at how relaxed the other 4 fingers are. I could go one more step and get them ready to play the next notes. So here they're 2, 3, and 4 are now on the next notes I need. As soon as that thumb transition happens. And we can do the same thing up an octave. But let's say the end of every grouping, there's that point, the hand is fully relaxed. We continue to practice more and more of those points in. How we structure those can depend on a lot from piece to piece. But that's a quick kind of overarching answer to your question, Nadia. Great question. Rhodesy said with the Mozart Sonata, I think K545, your friend said you can gliss the scales and it still works. Well, I would never perform it like that, Rhodesy. It might kind of work, but we'd probably lose the real crispness that we need to have in Mozart if we gliss the scales. Right? It just turns a little mushy. Let's see, Jack. Jack said, hello. Hello, Jack. I hope you're still here. For some reason, Jack says, for some reason, you think of B major as purple, the B major scale. Interesting. That could bring up a very interesting talk that I would spend probably too much time on. But I think that it's very interesting to talk about keys and scales as having some other characteristics other than just what they are. I'll give you one example because it's one that one of my students always cracked up about. But any time we'd have a piece in D flat, I would I would tell him that D flat major, it sounds to me like melting butter. It's just like, and I love food. I love butter. I mean, it's great stuff. So there's another component for me to that analogy. But D flat it's so warm and it's so cozy and it feels so good. It sounds so nice. if I were to give it a color, I'm not synesthetic. But if I were to give D flat a color, it would be like burgundy or something like that. A really, really rich color. But there are people that are synesthetic that see colors and shapes, actually see them when they hear music and things like that. It's very interesting. I have a couple friends that that have that ability, let's say. It's very interesting. They're also both composers, which is even more interesting. Jack, for you, D flat is light brown. Interesting. Okay, good. Let's continue on. Oh, so XZY asks, they say, I've heard lots of people say to practice passages in dotted rhythms, sometimes with staccato. What advantage does that have over just doing slow practice? Good question. Dotted rhythms, let's start with that. Dotted rhythms, anytime we change, let's say a steady passage into an uneven passage, we're making two things happen. One, wherever the longer component of the passage is, let's stick with D flat. How about D flat arpeggio? Yep. Okay. Anytime there's a pause, or for example, a dotted eighth versus a 16th. On the pause, we're giving the mind time to catch up and think about and comprehend what we've just executed. So that's really important. It also, because of that, we end up creating groupings. And the principle of groupings rhythmic groupings in practice can be extrapolated much further than just long, short patterns. But we can take it and we can make any rhythmic pattern that has a number of quick notes and then one long note. And it serves the same purpose. And that is give the mind time to catch up and give the hand time to rest, even if it isn't going to get that time in the middle of a passage in performance. Now, the other note, again, if we're sticking with, let's say, 16ths, dot, 16th, right? The 16th note pushes us faster than we could ever possibly execute the same phrase if we asked ourselves to do it all in one run. So we're learning how to move the hand faster in very small increments, way faster than we'll need. At least at our current moment in practice, maybe, and you could also use this, you could practice rhythms far faster than you ever would need to perform them, and that creates more stability and more control in performance. So no matter what level of music we're learning, I know so many people through professional level that practice with rhythms and with long, short patterns because of that. We get that extra time to comprehend what we've worked on. The mind gets that, the hand gets it. Plus, we get to practice really pushing faster than we'll ever need to go. Those are two really big components. Staccato. The advantage of using staccato, I prefer calling it detached instead of staccato because a staccato articulation I think of it as having two components. There is a short attack and a short release. And sometimes staccato can make us feel like, because the release is so fast, we end up pulling the fingers or the hand or something, we end up pulling it back from the keys. Unless you're really advanced and know your technique well, that can be a pitfall that we fall into, is that staccato turns into tension. But detached isn't quite as crisp, but we only think about one motion instead of two. Yes? We only think about the down motion. The release is purely a byproduct of letting relaxation happen. So if we practice detached correctly, we can even go faster. That's very easy. It's very easy to keep things crisp and to keep things articulated nicely with the hand when we're achieving that relaxation between every articulated note. That's the main advantage, I think, that detached practicing has. Not staccato, because staccato is still under tension, which is the same reason why we go and think about practicing detached in the first place. If a teacher suggests detached practicing, it's probably because there is too much tension when we play legato. There's too much holding on to each note that's preventing the hand from moving freely. Not to say that we don't always need to hold on playing legato, but there's a difference between holding on with tension and holding on, I don't even know if you can see this, but holding on with tension and holding on with very free mechanism. And there's also a tonal difference when we play legato under tension versus play it freely and relaxed. And so when we practice detached, we're letting every articulation, every note have that moment to rest. And in fact, we can still, the more skilled you get with that practice, the faster you can push the tempo to actually being quite quick before playing detached starts to cause, if you continue to try to hear the detachment, let's say, it can cause some other issues. But as we've talked about in other streams, very fast legato playing is actually detached. It just happens so quick that that is all detached. Technically, if we slowed it down, there would be tiny little moments where things weren't connected. But it happens so fast that our ears don't perceive those little gaps. So it still sounds legato. We still give the impression of smoothness and legato playing, but the hand is given all of the relaxation it needs in order to execute. Yeah. Yeah. So those are the advantages of that type of practice. XCY. Great question. Yeah. Let me grab some coffee. Oh, it's great to see so many of you here. Wonderful. Let's see. Rotzi says, is my practice wrong? I play the music as it's meant to be played and not changing it with different methods and techniques. Rotzi, there are two distinct approaches to practicing at the piano. And one that's become especially, I'd say, apparent online in the last few years is that, from some really, really wonderful teachers, is that we should never play anything in a way that is not how we intend to perform it. I think there is truth in that, but I only think there is truth in that when you're an extremely advanced student. When you're very, very advanced and your ear knows exactly how you want your interpretation to sound, and you have complete control of your technique, and you can decide every finger how it's going to articulate and be used. Yes, that's a great goal. So when in my own playing, if there is not a very, very challenging technical passage, yes, I will always be attempting every run through. I'm probably not going to use practice techniques, other breakdowns of how I'm going to view the music or work on the music, if they're not necessary. It's always going to be practice from point A to point B through a phrase or through a movement or a piece that is as close to how I'd like to present it in public as possible. Now, in order to get there, though, I spent a lot of time using various practice techniques. And when it comes to passages that take a lot of focused practice to learn, think any of the 24 Chopin etudes. Those are going to be full of extra practice techniques and extra rhythmic groupings and extra work on dynamics, not necessarily exactly how I intend to perform the piece, because I want to train my hands to move through those very, very advanced techniques and be able to execute them in any way, coming from any position and any dynamic. I want to have a solution, if you will, from note to note to note to note to note that works in every possible scenario. It's kind of a safety net, if you will. And if I don't do that, things might go really well in practice to a certain point. And then when there's a performance or there's anxiety or you play for a teacher or something like that, anywhere where we feel a little stressed, that muscle memory that we've built it goes out the window. Yeah. Our mind takes over and fight or flight comes in. There's a strong cortisol response. And what happens is the brain says, this isn't important. What's important is that like this, we get out of here. Whatever we can do to get this over with. So we have to have lots of backup plans. Those backup plans come both with certain types of mental engagement, but also I find all of that extra rhythmic practice and non-performance practice tremendously helps. So, good question, Rhodesy. I have never had a student advanced enough, and I've had people applying to Juilliard that are my students. I've never felt like I have an advanced enough student to not suggest using other practice techniques and methods. That's how rare I think that is. Cool, great question. Sebastian, are you still here, Sebastian? Your question came in probably, 20 minutes ago or 30 minutes ago. But thanks for the question. Sebastian says, I started playing the piano when I was 4. You say you have excellent ears, so you never really tried reading notes. Now that's one of your biggest weaknesses. What is the best way to learn reading notes? Sebastian, 2 things. Do a lot of reading that it's going to sound simple to your ears. Do a lot of sight reading of very, very, very beginner level music and just inundate yourself with it. 30 minutes a day, pull out books or go online and grab a whole bunch of music and just sight read for 30 minutes every day. And really, really, really make it sight reading. There's a lot of components that can go into sight reading better, so I'm not going to talk about that because we want to read notation better. And first we have to learn notation well before we can really, I think, understand more about sight reading faster. So spend a lot of time just immersing yourself in scores. Heck, even read scores along with music as you listen to it. And try to pick things that don't have so many notes. And once in a while, test yourself. You know, if you listen to Chopin's Second Piano Sonata, can you follow along in the score? Can you keep up with the music? Can our eyes start to recognize all of those symbols and how our ears are hearing that, right? Second thing, Sebastian, write some music yourself. It doesn't have to be complicated. It could be 8 bars. Just write a melody, write some chords, a couple things. Learn, whatever you want to write. Play it first. You have great ears. You can memorize it very quickly. Make a voice recording on your phone or some device that's super convenient and easy. Then get some either just paper, manuscript paper, or get a tablet, an iPad, something with blank staff paper. Notate it all out by hand. That is probably going to teach you more than everything else about notation. And hopefully there's someone that can check your work. So do the best you can notating it out, and then continue to go through that practice. Continue to write music. It doesn't have to be, like I said, it doesn't have to be complex or complicated or long. Hopefully you enjoy it, but it doesn't have to be beautiful or anything like that. The purpose is take an idea that is auditory and put it on paper ourselves. So those are beautiful. I just scrolled down, Sebastian. I'm glad you're still here. And Sebastian, I just asked, what type of practice techniques would you recommend for getting stronger and faster fingers? A lot of what we just talked about, actually. taking things in groupings, detached playing, especially detached playing, where we really focus on dropping, because strong playing has less to do with finger articulation, right, than whole arm articulation. So it's not about strengthening fingers. It's just about learning how to coordinate the mechanism from further up the arm, even all the way into the shoulder and in the back. So anytime we play detached where the focus is on drop, that's going to be really helpful. It always starts slow, Sebastian. It always starts slow. And so you might not think that the results for playing faster are going to come from that, but they absolutely will. Usually my students totally underestimate how slow you need to take some of the practicing in order to make progress. It needs to be extraordinarily slow sometimes. Oh, let me go back up. Rotzi said, is Chopin's method the best to follow for piano playing in general? I'd say it's very, very, very good. It won't, like I mentioned before about Taubman playing, it won't necessarily lead you to the most dynamic playing. Chopin wasn't known for being able to play very loudly at all. In fact, writers at the time characterized his playing when he would play live. They would characterize it as Chopin was an expert in shades of piano and shades of pianissimo. And that rarely would you hear anything louder than mezzo forte. So we have scores of his, of course, that have forte markings and fortissimo markings and things like that. But how we hear it today played by pianists would not at all be how Chopin would have played it. And part of that was because of his approach to the keyboard. It didn't, and also there are other components too. The pianos weren't the same. The brand instrument he played wasn't as grand of a sound as some other brands that were around. But I think that a lot of Chopin has a great method about approach for the fingers and keeping the fingers where they're supposed to be that was pretty radical at the time. Because of that, it's super important to know. But I think we can add to that even more, especially when it comes to sinking in and generating extra power. But I would say we add to that, like I said, not it's not in place of, yeah. Okay, Bedlington Groomer, keep the wrist aligned. I'm glad. I'm catching up, everyone. Scott, thanks. Scott said the piano has a gorgeous sound. It's coming along. Those of you who have been with me for a while, I had all of the hammers on the piano replaced in April. And it's settling in nicely, I think. It's cool. 23 years after the piano was made, I had all new hammers put on. If people have questions about that, we can talk about that. But I'm going to move on. Let's see. A Bachwards fellow said, don't quite understand Taubman's rotation. I've seen it exaggerated, but not sure how it becomes resolved or integrated into a final technique. Bachwards fellow, by the way, welcome. Are we talking about wrist and forearm rotation like this? It's super important. Super important. Let me scroll down. Bachwards fellow. Oh, heavier. Okay, I'm getting ahead of myself seeing other comments. So, Bachwards fellow, let me know. Is it this forearm type rotation that you're referencing? If it is, it's, I think, incredibly important for all piano playing. And I start working on it with students very, very early, actually. And, in fact, with an exercise that's in the Hannon Faber book. It's really fantastic. And we manipulate it a little bit from what's printed. But this type of rotation we want to be able to maneuver the hand through that type of rotation, through, gosh, just about any passage. And so in order to build that, I will start with a student on 5th finger. I'll show this from the side and from the top as well. So 5th finger, rotating into 4, back to 5, 3, 2, and 1. And all around. So that there's almost no finger articulation in order to play that. There's the slightest bit of finger articulation to make sure we don't just play all the notes all at once. But it's very, very, very subtle. It's not like keeping the wrist flat and doing it here. When we do that, in fact, if you do that with me, if you're at a piano, you can feel all the tendons moving and retracting all the time. There's all kinds of retraction happening. Anytime a tendon needs to retract a finger, it is probably working in the opposite direction that another finger needs to go. And as we know from physiology, at least one of our tendons is tied. And depending on everyone's particular physiology, sometimes more of them are tied together, but they all work in conjunction. That's why the grasp of the hand is very simple for every human being. Everything works in tandem. Yeah? Grasping one finger is a much more advanced task for the body. 2 fingers is one thing, but then try to do 1, 2, and 4 without moving 5. Most people, unless you don't have typical physiology, most people cannot keep 5 still and grasp 1, 2, 3, 4, right? Because of that tendon issue. So how does that apply to playing? Whenever we're playing a passage, even just a scale, there is still wrist rotation that helps to make all of the finger movements smaller and more efficient. So when we know how to incorporate rotation in the most obvious ways, when we need to go from one side of the hand to the other, or from the middle of the hand to the other, or to outside, right? Or playing even, gosh, Alberti bass. That's all going to be with wrist rotation and very little finger articulation if we do it efficiently. And those are maybe the simplest ways. But then, even if it comes to playing a scale, there's, as we move, here's A major, as we move through 3rd finger, there is rotation to the 5th finger, to the outside of the hand, to allow the thumb to come in. And as the thumb plays, there's rotation back toward the thumb as it drops. Rhodesy, I'm on Bachward's fellow question from, I don't know, a bit ago. And it's about rotation in the Taubman approach. So even through a scale, which we normally think of as this linear passage, and one in which, of course, we can play it without moving the top of the hand, the wrist, the forearm, right? And of course, a lot of music that uses passages like that was written well before the Taubman approach was developed. But think about the instruments that were played. The finger school, the finger method, was the only method of teaching technique at the piano in the time of Bach, and even beyond. If we get into Mozart's time, I think that was still the only method of playing. When we reach Beethoven, there starts to be a weight method of playing. And as time progresses, more and more of those methods are developed. And that is one of the reasons why Hannon exercises from the original book, why I'm not a fan of them, because the directions from the original Hannon score are all about the finger method of playing the piano, which really it will barely take you into advanced level playing on the modern instrument. It would allow you to play anything of Bach's on a harpsichord or on a pipe organ where the action is very light. The keys go down super easily. There aren't big stretches. Playing any of that music, though, on a Steinway D or on a very heavy piano, even that's going to be more difficult. And Hannon doesn't teach how to develop any of it because it purely follows the finger approach, which is, if you've had teachers or if you know stories of teachers where, they put a quarter on the top of your hand and say the quarter has to stay there throughout your entire performance. And if it falls off, you start over again. That is training the hand to only use fingers to play. And that is the oldest approach to teaching technique. And more lately, it's being proven to have harmed people's techniques. Yeah, let's leave it there for now. So yeah, backwards fell. I hope that helps. When I start working on that with students, we start from 5 in both hands. So it could be, that's okay. You could come up with anything. I usually do hands separately, but this is an A. And if you want it to be, if you want it to correspond to one of the hand and exercises, the exercise is this one. I don't remember which number that is in the book. But you can apply it to Hannon. You just have to use different techniques than what he prescribes in his method book. Notice just how much right hand rotation happens. As opposed to all fingers. I can't even do it with only fingers. But I think immediately you could also hear that the volume of the right hand became far less because the fingers themselves aren't as strong, right? They're not as strong when we isolate them from the rest of the mechanism. Oh, great. Okay. Oh, I'm going back. Oh, hello, Antonio. I'm sorry I didn't see you earlier, Antonio, but welcome. Plain piano, welcome. I haven't seen you here on the stream before, so welcome. You say, I'm stretching my hands before practicing every morning for 9 months. Is that healthy? I feel a decent control over the keys. I would ask what type of stretches you're doing, but yeah, stretching is good. One of the ones that's just the simplest, easiest to accomplish, that helps to get the blood flowing, is a simple expansion. So I'm not just holding the hand open, but stretching it and then letting it come to rest. Not making a fist, because the fist is under tension, but expansion for a count of like 1 and rest, 3, 4. Expansion, rest, 3, 4 on both hands. Yeah, and you can really feel that. In between the fingers, we can feel that. That's a great one. Another that I don't do it very often unless I'm really cold, but you can do some simple kind of stretching of the muscles in the arm. And so if we hold the hand upright and very gently pull the fingers back, that feels really nice. And that helps to stretch down here, all of this. And then if we turn the other way around, that also stretches a very similar area, right? So whichever one is more, is easier for you to do, that works. But go very lightly. It doesn't take much pull on the fingers to make that stretch happen. And you can do a little bit going this way to stretch the top of the forearm. So pulling the hand down. But don't overdo it. I wouldn't hold these out. If anybody here is into athletics or anything, or yoga, don't feel like you need to hold these stretches for a long period of time. So if we're doing this, no more than 4 or 5 counts, and let it go and shake it out even. I might even keep it a little shorter than that, 2 or 3 counts, because we don't really need much. So yeah, if things are feeling really cold for me, I'll do a little bit of that stretching, or I just kind of move the fingers a little bit, get the blood flowing. More often than not, if we feel an issue at the keyboard, it's not due to a lack of warm-up, unless we're jumping into something extremely technical. It's not due to a lack of warm-up. It's probably due to something else in our technique not being as developed as it should be. So an interesting test for everybody would be Can you sit down completely cold and play through your repertoire without playing a single note first? Can you jump in and have everything be executed as if you've been playing already for 2 hours and have it feel the same way? Our goal is that, yes, we can. Maybe for everything except some crazy gymnastics, some crazy passage work. In which case, that extra blood flow is going to help us execute that a little bit easier. But for the most part, I'd say, yeah, can we play ever? It's a good test. Now, I'm not saying don't warm up, because I really believe in warm-ups, and I believe, especially as we're learning an instrument, we want to approach our practice from the best possible place. But jumping in is a test of how much are we learning about that best possible place. Can we go there immediately, or do we need time to feel things out first? Great question. All right. I was catching up and I feel like I fell behind again. Let's say Bunny. Bunny had said, you're getting a completely restored 1928 Steinway. I'm so excited for you. Oh, and you said they called to ask how to regulate the keys. That's very kind of them. Whether that was Steinway or someone else that you're buying from. And you said, tender touch and play like butter. That's interesting. Yeah. I mean, wonderful. I'm so glad. That's going to be a fantastic piano. That'll be really, really lovely. Yeah. Talking to a technician about how you'd like a piano to feel and sound is an art in itself. I think you had a good description. And if the technician plays, they should know what that means. But gosh, Bunny, when do you get the piano? And or do you have more time to tell them something? Tell them preparation. I can tell you a little bit of what I like. December 23rd. Oh, right before Christmas. That's so exciting. Oh, yeah. Road C says, bet that was expensive. You know, it could be. It's interesting. You can, when you're looking at Steinways that are 100 years old, there are some good deals out there. There's some good deals. I mean, they're still going to be expensive compared to a digital, almost any digital. But compared to a new Steinway, they're going to be a fraction of the price. Oh, OCD King, a while ago, you had said, don't forget to hit the like button. Please, yeah, hit the thumbs up for me. That's much appreciated. Lone Wolf says, greetings from Romania. Hello. And Miguel, hello there, Miguel. Curtis, I hope you're still here, Curtis. I'm just getting to your question now. See, Curtis had asked, said you're working on Chopin Nocturne Opus 48, number 1, at the agitato, and there's chords. Would you play first F and G with just the thumb? Let's pull up the music. And let's see. Give me just a second and then I can put that on the screen for all of us. Okay. So Opus 48 is this piece. love this nocturne. Okay, so looking at the agitato. You probably mean where that theme comes back, right? I think that's where we're talking about, Curtis. F, G, D, G. Unless... Oh, I don't see agitato marked anywhere in my score. Can you give me a bar number, Curtis? Give me a bar number, if you have it. Oh, you said, okay, there. Okay, great. Okay, now let me go back to your question. F, G, D, G. So, F. F, G, D, G. Curtis, still give me a bar number because I'm not seeing, let's see, bar 50. You said bar 50. That's probably the beginning of the section, yeah? I'm not seeing those particular notes offhand. Yeah. G, A flat. Yeah. Yeah, help me out, Curtis, if you can. Or give me a little bit more, because I'm not sure if I'm looking for right hand, left hand, or the harmony. I'm not seeing an F, the harmony. I'm not seeing chords that are what you mentioned. Or let me know if we just start talking about the first bar of it. F and G with just thumb. Let me go back and count while we're waiting for Curtis to get me that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. I always wish that all scores had measure numbers for us. 18, 19, 20, 25 is the lento. 29, 30, 31, 36. 37, 38, 39, 40, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I think this is 50. Oh, Ekier Edition is great. I just don't have it. I don't have it on my iPad. I have a paper copy only. Yeah, Curtis, I still can't find that. So if are we talking about, I mean, we must be talking about that. I still can't find F, G, D, G though anywhere. Unless, is it the second bar? I was maybe looking too spread out for you. Let's talk about that. Yes, and if that's the case, then this is a much easier question that I could have answered very quickly for you. All right, so I think we're looking at this measure. Yeah, okay. Yeah, absolutely. So Curtis, your question was I'm sorry it took so long to find the answer to this, but yes. So F and G are both played with the thumb as one unit. So. Let me show you that from the top down so you can see a little bit of the hand shape that's going on there. Okay, so that chord in that second bar of the agitato, that's the bottom. So F, G, D. So the thumb is just spread over both of those notes. 5 plays that uppermost. And then for the final D of where that melody has to get pronounced, I would move. So don't continue playing that with 1 on both of those, but 1 for the bottoms, and then on the last one, I'd move to 5, 2, 1 instead. So. I hope that makes sense, yeah. Curtis, do you have any other questions about this piece before we move on? Now that we found that answer, I want to make sure that I'm most helpful for you. Thanks for being here, Nadia. Cheers. I'll say at the bottom of the chat, just in case Curtis has another question. Let's see, Curtis, you say, we were trying to find fingering that would work individually, but the thumb is all you could find for this. Yes, for the beginning. Yeah, absolutely. My edition has the thumb recommended there. And absolutely, from coming into it from the previous bar, yeah, absolutely. We can get the thumb in place to play that, and I think that's the best solution. But yeah, like I said, I would change it for the final melody note, because if we continue with thumb and get the hand in place for the next melody note, now we're asking the thumb to move from quite a strange position if 5 has played the melody note, and then make this very quick leap. Let me show you what that's looking like. So here we're spread out and we have to play with the thumb, both of those pitches. But then if we come down to play 5, look at how that's kind of an awkward shape. And then immediately there's all of that movement to get the thumb to the E flat. And we can help minimize some of this big reach if instead we move to 1, 2, 5 on that last. And then it's just a slide up, which is really nice, right? So that one little change in fingering, that one change just so significantly sets us up for success in the remaining part of that bar. Yeah. Let's see, you say, what fingering would you recommend for the left hand there when it's not octaves? Curtis, do you have a big reach? For example, do you have at least a 9th, if not a 10th, alone in the left hand? If you do have that big of a reach, I would be playing this alternating 6th to octave with 2, 5, 2, 5 here, 1, 4 on the octave. But you need pretty large hands to play that. Same thing here, 2, 5, 1, 4. Oh, here I'm even playing 1, 3. You could choose between 1, 3 and 1/4. They're both pretty good. You say you can reach a ninth almost comfortably. Okay, so this is going to require a little bit more movement of the wrist in order to really facilitate this. So don't try to grasp it from one hand position and keep it, for example, like right now I've stuck my hand in one. We don't want to do that. You'll be slightly prohibited from the fact that you probably can't reach that to begin with, which is a good thing. Same thing here. You will definitely want to use 2-5-1-4 and not 1-3, because 1-3 is a bigger stretch. So instead of being stuck, let the wrist carry the thumb up and then carry the hand back to 5. Thumb 5, thumb 5. Thumb 5, thumb 5. So there's a lot of fluidity in that movement. Yeah, good question. Good question. All right. Great. Miguel. All right, I know we said hello, Miguel. Miguel, you said you're performing on December 19th. Awesome. Sometimes you feel bad when you don't perform as well as you could. So any advice to improve that? To improve performance or improve how you feel after performance? Improving performance, some of the things, we've probably talked about this when you've been on streams before, Miguel. Play for others sooner rather than later. And just get in that practice of sitting down and having to play and not having that warm-up time and not having a lot of time to get comfortable on the bench before you need to go. So it's always great. Practice at home, coming, bowing, sitting, playing, bowing. Even if there's no one there, that's great because it helps us go through those motions. If we talk about instead feeling how we feel after a performance, always look for the great things that have happened, Miguel. Always look for, sometimes performances can be full of weird things, right? And that's okay. But always look for the best components, the best things that happened, and hold on to those. Make those your memories of your performances. So if you really loved the way you phrased something, also don't think about this while you're actually playing. Play and then reflect on it later. But look first for, gosh, I loved the way I phrased the melody in this section. It came out just how I intended, or it came out really well. Or I love the intensity that I captured in this moment. Those are just examples of things that you can tell yourself. Always, always, always go there first. And then we've kind of put the things that we need to work on if we're going to play the piece again, or whenever we perform again, the things we need to work on are in a package that's not exclusively negative. Yeah. So there's always positive. And every time we play, there will absolutely always be positive things that happen. So look for those and hold on to those and make those your memories of, of your performance. And if you can, create a visual afterward and kind of make that something those moments that you can relive. That would be my biggest advice. Does that help you? Miguel? And if you've got a long, I don't know how much music you're playing, but if it's like a full recital program and it's long, stay in the moment from piece to piece to piece, and even from phrase to phrase to phrase. If things don't go well, we've all been there, but the most important thing is we just put that aside. If we're in the middle of playing a piece, we put it aside and we say, you know what? I'm going to make up for that with my next phrase. And the audience is going to hear what I'm really capable of in the next phrase. So we're always looking forward to the next thing and keeping it positive. All right. Let's say Scott. Scott has said, you heard an amazing interview with Horowitz from the mid-70s. Among the 100 fascinating comments, he didn't practice mechanical exercises, but acquired his technical skill from practicing music. That is possible for someone like Horowitz. Yeah, that is possible in a lot of cases. But I think, I mean, if you know the story about how Horowitz became famous, I believe he was, he got an opportunity to play, I think it was Rachmaninoff's second piano concerto when he was like 17. 17 years old, maybe 18. And he was a backup for another pianist who, I can't remember who it was. They got sick or they couldn't make the performance. Horowitz was local and could do it. And he gave a fantastic performance. But put that in perspective. He was 17 and playing Rock 2 publicly. And he had played it publicly before. Okay. So there's a certain level of innate talent in a person like that. Not just developing piano skills from a young age, but to get to that point so young. Yeah. So I don't, anytime I hear advice or statements from, it depends on who the person is. If they, you know, were a child prodigy and they debuted when they were 4 or 5 or 6 years old, I tend to not apply their pedagogical wisdom to 99.9% of humans. Because what worked for them, they probably could have had anything work for them. Let's put it that way. But still, I always love hearing from the great pianists and hearing how they think. It's always very interesting. Oh, let's see. Julio, you have a question about sending in a submission for the masterclass. So you said once you send in a video, what's the best chance for it to be featured on the next live stream? Julio, always, I have not yet had a live stream where I have had to push submissions to the next one. I came close a couple weeks ago. I think we had 3 or 4 submissions. But right now, I don't have any for the next live stream. And so I always take them in the order they come in. So the best thing you can do is send me an email. ASAP. Send me an email ASAP, and then the order that I get those emails is usually the order that I'll feature them on the next live stream, and I will let you know if it's not going to be possible to fit it in. So depending on what it is, like if we have 2 late intermediate or advanced pieces of rep that we're working on, and I get 2 submissions, that's probably all I'll take for a live stream, because each one of those pieces will take 30 to 45 minutes to get through. And that's going to be plenty of time. I believe the class that I gave on just the first 4 pages of Rachmaninoff's second piano concerto, I spent an hour on it. So, and that was only, 10%, not even 10% probably of the entire piece. So yeah, Julio, just send me an email as soon as possible, and then we'll talk. Speaking of Rock 2, Sebastian says you're currently working on Rock 2 for a concert in February. You said you've never worked on a piece as long as this one before. Do you have any tips for performing a piece of this length? Yeah. Well, Sebastian, do you have an opportunity to play it with orchestra? Let us know. Let us know. Is it with orchestra or is it the 2 piano version? Both are very exciting. And also, while you're writing that down, Sebastian, can you let us know what is the next most lengthy piece of music that you've tackled? If Rock 2 is 30-ish minutes, have you played sonatas that are 20, 25 or so? Or is this a big, big leap from maybe 15 minutes or less in one piece of music all the way to 30 or so. Let's see what Sebastian says. And in the meantime, I'll give you a little bit of a few other thoughts about that. Okay, when we have to perform a piece of music that's a considerable length like that, and it's intense and requires a lot of focus and a lot of energy, especially if we're playing with an orchestra and we have to really, really play fortissimo. Most of the piece is going to be played incredibly loudly because of balancing the orchestra, and if it's in a big hall. First, I would recommend building up your endurance on the bench at the piano. So, and I don't necessarily mean playing for hours on end without a break, but I mean getting used to, if you have time, especially as you get closer, can you be on the bench practicing for 45 minutes without a break? Don't stop. Keep things going. Yeah. And then can we take 5 minutes and do another 45 minutes and 5 minutes and do another 45 minutes? Hopefully, if you're playing Rock 2, you've got many hours a day to practice. And then let's be sure that as we're practicing, we can stay focused, we can stay engaged in all of the music making that we're trying to do. That means we can still be working on techniques, we can still be practicing passages, but the focus stays there for the entire duration that we're on the bench. See you, Bunny. Thanks for tuning in. All right. So the focus stays there for that entire duration. Yeah. And also, we're going to be putting our body through a little bit more of what we're going to experience live in the performance. So I would say, can we be able to play for 5-6 hours in a day, maybe most of an afternoon? And can we get through all of that and feel good about it and maybe be tired but not exhausted? Can we build up our endurance on the bench to that point? So this we should never feel physically tired, like we physically can't continue to play or execute something or something like that. But it's more about the mental focus. Can the mental focus stay there? And then secondly, if you have an opportunity or make opportunities for yourself to perform the piece when you get really close, perform the piece twice a day. So try to do one full run through, full performance in the morning or earlier in the day, take a long break or do some other practicing, and then come back and sit down and play the entire piece again later in the day. Can we go through all of that multiple times in one day? There's going to be a lot of, when you get to the performance, there's going to be a lot of adrenaline that carries you through that. And so if we've built this other endurance up where we know that our muscles aren't going to fatigue, it's only a matter of staying mentally focused through those long durations. And the adrenaline will help with that as well. So yeah, stay engaged from phrase to phrase to phrase, right there. Those would be my biggest suggestions. Anytime we've got this, and we could apply this to any piece. It doesn't have to be a concerto necessarily, but any of the long sonatas, any really, really big pieces, any multi-movement work, even if they're not sonatas, like Schumann's Carnival, which is very long, and I can't remember how many movements, something like 10, 15 pieces. Anything that's like that, we can apply this same stuff. So Sebastian, I didn't hear from you, so I hope you were still here. But I think we can all learn from some of that. All right. Let's see. A lone wolf. I'm glad I'm finally getting a lone wolf to your comment about Hannon. I'm glad the explanations worked. So that sounds great. Nancy, you said, I'm pretty sure I was taught to keep my hand flat and only move my fingers. Yes. There were a lot of teachers that taught that. A lot of teachers that taught that. I like to say, this is going back to the Taubman approach that we've spent a bit of time on today, but the Taubman approach, I believe, was developed in the beginning in the 50s and 60s. I'd have to look that up to be sure. But it's taken a long time. It's happened relatively quickly, all things considered, but it's taken time to disseminate that information, starting with kind of the most elite schools of music. And slowly, as students of those schools have graduated and have gone on to teach others, that information is slowly making its way to everybody. But before that time, it would have been almost impossible. It would have been almost impossible to learn it or to even hear about it existing. Okay. I think I'm finally getting close to the end. Let's see. Dith has another question. I'm just making it. Dith, this might be, well, probably close to the end, unless I missed somebody. Okay. Dith. Let's see. You say you've got a piece you're learning. It has rolled chords in it, and you're finding that you're hitting 1, 5, 3, probably right hand, 1, 5, 3 instead of 1, 3, 5. Any tips? Yeah. Let's just take a simple triad, Dith. How about E major? So 1, 3, 5. And what you're saying is happening is that. Right? Let's incorporate some of the rotation that we talked about earlier. So starting with thumb, we're going to be in neutral position. So the top of the hand is flat. We're going to slightly rotate toward 3 and then slightly rotate toward 5. Can you see that? I hope you can. 1, slight rotation, slight rotation. And also look at the direction that the wrist is going. So going nice and slow, holding each of those notes. Yep. Practice a little bit of that. You can do that in both hands as well, of course. So a little rotation. Let's build that in to become just a part of our technique. Second, let's break the chord into 2 components. Let's have a bottom component and a top component. And then we're going to strike the bottom at one time and the top together or separately at another time. So for example, start with E on the bottom and then the 2 notes on top. And can we also feel that rotation toward 3 and 5 as we play it? And we're making sure 3 and 5 sound together. If there's a finger at this point, and you can continue using this beyond, but if there's a finger that is striking late, the late finger, so going back to your question, you said 3 is the late finger. If whatever the latest finger is, focus on that finger leading the other ones, 1 or more, that you want to have happen, let's say, simultaneously right now. So if 3 still can't strike with 5 when we break it like this, make 3 the focus. So we're focused on 3 and 5 follows and plays with it. Instead of trying to think about, I'm going to play both at the same time, which might lead us to breaking it again, right? And then we flip, okay? Now let's take the bottom and rotate toward the top. Yeah? So we've now gone through 3 things. Full rotation across all 3 notes, breaking it, still feeling rotation, and then, okay, practice all of those things, pick that finger leader for us, and then when it comes to rolling the whole chord. Once again, if 3 is still the latest finger and it's not behaving, focus on that one. You could even give it a little accent. Okay. I think those are my best tips for you with rolled chords. Yeah. Rotation's important in there. It'll really make it easier. And the bigger the chords get, right, the more rotation we can incorporate to really make it easier. Okay, great. Okay, I'm almost at the bottom. All right, awesome. Hey, if you're joining us and you haven't clicked that like button, can you click the like button for me? Thank you. This has been a fun day of a lot of questions from a variety of levels. Really, really fun stuff. Rotsa, you just checked out Soldier's March. Great. Great. That is a late beginner piece of music. Let's see, Nelba. Hello, Nelba. Oh, well, thank you. Merry Christmas to you too, Nelba. Okay, Julio. Julio says, I've noticed the second movement of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata isn't as popular as the first and the third. Is there a reason for that? Probably. Yeah. Okay. Probably the couple reasons. The first movement tends to get played by, it tends to be played by pianists at a lower level. So a lot more pianists have the opportunity to play the first movement in the Moonlight Sonata. I think, musically speaking, it's actually an incredibly difficult movement to play. Physically, the notes are easier to execute. But musically, you have to be very mature to play a convincing first movement of the Moonlight Sonata. The third movement, on the flip side, is advanced, and it's usually it's a movement that I think people look forward to playing before they can play it. And so we don't incorporate, a lot of people won't incorporate the middle movement of the sonata until they're advanced enough to play entire Beethoven sonatas. They're going to work on the first movement at an earlier stage in their development. They're going to work on the third movement a little bit later, and it'll probably be one of the first advanced Beethoven movements that they tackle. And the second movement is going to get left by the wayside because, relatively speaking, there are few people, compared to people that learn the first movement, let's say, there are relatively few people that progress far enough to have a need or desire to learn, let's say, an entire Beethoven sonata. You will have to be either in a degree program in order to have that be a requirement. Christopher, my goodness, thank you. You're always so kind. Oh, and thank you for the recommendation, Christopher. I appreciate that. And you said it's far more than Christmas music. So Christopher's recommending my Christmas course. Thank you for that. I've been meaning to follow up with you, but I'm glad you're enjoying it. And it's true what I say, that it is about way more than just Christmas music. So I'm glad you found that as well. And Bachwards Fellow, you've also gone through the Christmas program. So thanks. So there we go, Julio. I think that's the reason why the middle movement is beautiful. But that's the reason why we don't hear it as often and we don't hear it discussed as often. You're usually probably going to be in a degree program studying music before you're going to probably play it. Or you're going to be playing professionally or semi-professionally before you're going to play it. Otherwise, there are so many other things. If you've learned the first movement and the third movement, there's so many other Beethoven sonatas, of course. So I think a lot of people will say, oh, I've learned the Moonlight Sonata, even though we haven't played this middle movement. And there's so much more music to explore. So it just won't, people won't come back to it. Okay. And XCY said, Will's Keyboards Inc. Will's Keyboards Inc. Yeah, I think that's an interesting explanation, XCY, that you're saying that creator's take was that the second movement is more toned down. between the different intensities of the first and the third. Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, cool. Well, my goodness, I've made it through all the questions. Did I miss anybody's question? I apologize if I did. If I did, please type it in again at the bottom in the chat right now, because I'm all the way scrolled down. Beautiful, beautiful. Oh, Lone Wolf. Great question, Lone Wolf. So you're saying, what are your thoughts on copying an interpretation versus trying to make it your own? Is that bad? For instance, Arau has an amazing interpretation of Moonlight Sonata. Is it bad if you're trying to copy that? Okay, great question. Okay, like any art form, I think every teacher of any art would tell you that in order to learn to be great, you first copy others who have been great before you. And there's nothing wrong with that, especially if you're not claiming it to be your own, right? So yeah, we can get into trouble if we copy something and say, well, this is mine. Music might be a gray area there, because is it even possible to fully copy someone else's interpretation? That would be a whole philosophical discussion itself. So I think it's a great idea to use interpretations by the masters, and there will always be some that resonate with you more than others. Sir Wolseley, welcome. I haven't seen you, Sir Wolseley, and it feels like ages. So there will always be interpretations that resonate more with you than others. And it's one of the really interesting and maybe even profound things about classical music, I think, is 100 pianists can play one work 100 different ways, and they are all very valid interpretations. But each of us that listens, and will change over time for you as well, the more you learn about music, the more your idea of what constitutes a good interpretation will change. But certain of those interpretations will resonate with us a whole lot more than others. It's very interesting, and when it's the same work, just how much personality of the artist comes through. So, yes, great to listen, great to try to understand why they're phrasing things the way they are and what the intention is behind them. The one caveat I have for you is that the great pianists and the masters that we listen to have a profound foundation and understanding of underlying musicality and the work itself. That understanding comes out in inflections in how they play. So while we might hear, let's say, a particular rhythm, let's talk about Moonlight Sonata. We might hear a particular pianist play the melody and kind of hang on that last 16th of that first before letting it move on. And another pianist might go more straight through that. Both are very valid. If we only hear the stretch and rhythm, but we don't understand the foundation of why, and we don't count in the way that they are counting in their mind, which we have no idea what that is. We can't be in their mind. But if we don't have that underlying structure for our interpretation, the risk is that we end up playing which is close. And even if we put a recording of us side by side with something else, we might say, oh, that rhythm is really close. But there's something about it that wasn't there in what we played, which tears apart the interpretation and makes it not work anymore. So it's always really important to build that foundation for ourselves. And what we might find is that the more time we might model an interpretation to begin with, and the more time we sit with a piece of music, and the more time it simmers for us, and then the less time that we spend listening back and modeling, actually, the further we're going to go away from that interpretation that we like. If we happen to come back around after a lot of time has passed, and we say, oh, I'm actually playing it quite similarly, the way we arrived there wasn't actually by copying. So I hope this is all coming together. The way we end up arriving there is through our own conclusion, which just happens to be very similar to something that was played by someone else. But the biggest thing that I want to stress is that without that underlying structure for us to weave our music around, to go on the theme of my last video here on the channel, the thread of music and the thread of phrase, we could even call it like the thread of the entire piece, the thread of interpretation. If we aren't using the same material, if we can't push and pull in the same way that the master does, our interpretation is just, it's going to sound somewhat chaotic in comparison. I have a student that they're working on some music that I've written, which is, it's always fun and interesting. And they have taken, for example, recording of me playing my own work, and they've slowed it down to practice along with, and they're doing other things, and they come to a lesson and they say, I'm playing it like you, and that's great. I'm glad they like it. But they don't have that underlying foundation the same way that I do. Therefore, what comes across when they model my interpretation is almost changes in rhythm to be not what's on the page. But they don't hear that yet because they hear that they're just modeling another interpretation. When I was younger studying, we talked about Horowitz earlier today. I listened to Horowitz like mad. I listened all the time. Every Horowitz album I could get my hands on, I always listened to his interpretations of things. I loved them because they were very expressive, and they weren't the kind of straight interpretations of Rubinstein and others like that. And I still like playing music like that. I like a lot of stretch and a lot of rubato and a lot of emotion in music. But my teacher back then would tell me all the time, stop listening to Horowitz because it does not sound like him at all, and you're not counting. So there are pros and cons. So yes, continue to listen. It's great. It's great to put great music in our ears and in our minds. And at a certain point, we need to turn it off and let it simmer and marinate for ourselves. I hope that makes sense. Yes. Bedlington Groomer, I'll come back to that question. Let me answer a few other quick questions, and then we're going to come back, and we'll probably make that one the last one. Nelba, you said you have Christmas music, discs, or recording, Spotify. I have a massive amount, Nelba. I have, 30 or 40 pieces of Christmas music I've arranged. They're on Spotify. They're all on YouTube, on another channel, my other channel. I believe there's a link to my other channel in the description. But if you type my name in the YouTube search bar, it'll definitely come up. Speaking of that, Rhodesy said, how do you pronounce your surname? The way I pronounce it for Americans is Szczepanek, like S-T-E-P-A-N-I-C, more like Szczepanek. But the Polish pronunciation would be Szczepanek, which nobody in the US can ever say correctly. So I just skip that and we go with an Americanized version of it. Yes, my last name is Polish, and I am 50% Polish and 50%, let's say 25% German, 25% Czech. Yeah. A little more complicated than that, but that covers the bases. Well, thank you, OCD King. I appreciate that. Thank you. Awesome. Zach. I'll answer Zach's question, and then we're going to go back to, Sir Wolseley and Bedlington Groomer. Okay. Thanks, Diff. Zach's question, second. So you have a teacher that says to look into your imagination to come up with chords. What do you think? I think that's a great place to, if you're writing music, Zach, I think that's a fantastic place to go to. Yeah, use your imagination and experiment at the keyboard. And there are no boundaries. There are no walls. We don't have to fit anything into anything else when we're beginning and we're developing. Bye, Bethany. Thanks for being here. We don't have to create rules for ourselves. I think that's really important in keeping a creative spirit flowing. So, sure, what sounds good and what doesn't, and start to understand that for yourself using chords that you come up with. And then when you start to understand, let's say, some things sound good and some things really don't sound good, like, that sounds a lot nicer than I thought it was going to sound. How about this? That sounds pretty nasty, right? Can you figure out why that sounds disgusting and gross? Can you come up with a way to maybe make it not sound as bad? What if we play, if we put E flat under it? Now it sounds more dramatic. Interesting, still not very consonant, but it sounds a lot better than just that by itself, right? Why did that happen? I'm not going to give you those answers because I want you to figure those out for yourself, Zach. So, yeah, why do triads sound good? Why does this sound better? Same three notes. Yeah. Cool. Okay. Yes, Zach, it does. Yes, it does help to know theory. But if you're starting off and writing music, I wouldn't want theory to get in the way. I wouldn't want you to be tied to having to obey rules. The rules can help us continue to craft things. But I think the most important thing is, can you figure out what sounds good? That's going to be your voice. And then your voice is going to get developed. And you're going to have an innate, unique understanding of harmony and why it works and how it works. Then it can be refined with the rules of theory. And it can be aided with the rules of theory. But if we start with the rules of theory, the problem is then instead of feeling free to explore, you're going to say, well, I am playing something in D major, so I'm going to stick with a D major triad. Okay, well, that's fine. But the risk is we're not going to go exploring and figure out how so many other things can be changed and manipulated and experienced. So that's the reason, and I think that's also the reason why your teacher is saying to look into your imagination. Yeah. Plain piano piece suggestion: the Spanish Fantasy by Liszt. Oh, thanks, Zach. I can't hear it off the top of my head, but I've probably heard it before, plain piano. And it's probably gorgeous because it's Liszt. Okay, I wanted to go back up to Sir Wolseley and then Bedlington Groomer. Okay, Sir Wolseley, we're going to answer your question first, then Bedlington Groomer, and then we're going to call it a day because it's time. Sir Wolseley said, since y'all are talking about this, preferring an interpretation and not another. Does it boil down to just the first time you hear a piece, or is there more? That's a very interesting question. First off, I think there is a form of expression that's unique to every pianist, right? So every time we hear a recording, we're getting an impression of two things. We're getting an impression of the underlying composition, and we're getting an impression of the pianist that's interpreting it. If we've never heard a piece of music before, having both of those at the same time is going to be a little confusing. Sometimes that turns into someone saying, I don't like this particular piece, when actually it's because they didn't like the particular interpretation, not because the composition itself was, not because they didn't like that, right? So let's say we're talking about music that we've heard many times. So we're getting rid of the first listen component, because the first listen component can be confusing. But if we've heard a piece many times and then we're hearing a new pianist play it for the first time, we instinctively are doing two things. We're comparing it to all the other recordings that we've heard before. We know which ones we like and which ones we don't like. And we probably know why we like those and we don't like those. Some people prefer, if we boil it into kind of two categories, some people prefer music that is played very straight and the emotion is developed, but it's kind of contained within a box, and it's very nicely presented to us. It's just a nice package. You know, think about it like it's just a gift. It's in really nice wrapping paper. It's got a nice gold bow on it, and it's just perfect, and it's right here, and it's on a velvet little tablecloth. Very nice presentation. We'd all want to know what's inside the box. Absolutely, right? And another pianist on the other side of things would say, well, this piece of music is like, and they're not going to tell you something and put it in a box. It's going to be like the most raw emotion you could possibly imagine. It's going to be like watching a movie that has moved you more than any other movie ever, and the emotional roller coaster that it takes you through. Now, some people want to experience that. They want to experience that ride. I would be one of those. I want music to take me on a journey and take me very far and then bring me back. I don't want to hear music that's in a nice, very pretty box. Not to say that the pretty box is wrong. It's absolutely right. It's just not what I prefer. So I boiled those into two categories because I generally find that people prefer things that relatively fit into one of those two. And usually people that prefer the really nicely packaged music gravitate toward listening to Baroque and classical period music. And people that like the other really highly emotional electric journey don't listen to as much Baroque music and listen to a lot more romantic and post. Because those styles also, they lend themselves to both of those styles of interpretation. So I think there's something intrinsic within each person that leads us to one path or the other. But our ability to understand and appreciate the other is highly developed with more and more exposure to music and more understanding. So, for example, if I listen to a piece of music, here a great one would be the Chopin Nocturne that I played on the channel, and I did a video about comparing two different performances. Yes, I have not said anywhere what my favorite interpretation is of the two that I showed in that video. You can probably guess what it is. I'm still not going to say it today. But you can probably guess based on what we just talked about. So one of the interpretations is very straightforward. The other one is very wandering. But I go through a great deal of like we'll call it emotional analysis when I hear a performance, to say, well, what is it? What is it that they're trying to say with the piece? I put my own preferences aside for a moment and I say, okay, well, if this performance is straight and it's doing X, Y, and Z, why did that pianist choose that? Obviously, there's value in that interpretation. So I want to understand more about what they saw. And because every time I listen is an opportunity to learn something about somebody playing something, or to learn something about a piece of music. I want to dig in and find out what that thing is. What is that thing that I can learn from listening to this particular performance? And so I'll always challenge myself. And I think we can all do this. We can always find those things, even if we don't care for the interpretation as much as something else, because it resonates with us in a certain way that might be hard to describe. But we can still go through and say, well, what did they accomplish by changing this phrase, and by changing this phrase, and by taking a different allegro tempo? What was accomplished, and then what was lost? Yeah. And then we are actually kind of analyzing and learning from those performances, and we gain a greater understanding ourselves of what actually resonates with us when we take those moments, which, all tying together, helps us to build that foundation so that when we hear a performance and we like it and we try to copy it, we actually understand more of what goes into similar phrasing, rather than purely taking the final product and kind of trying to photocopy it, if you will. Yeah. Okay. Oh, Rhodesy, let me give you a quick answer before I go back to Bedlington Groomer. Left and right hand coordination. For scales, look for the points at which we use the same finger in both hands. And secondly, so for example, in your typical white key major scale, threes come together on the same pitch, both hands. So that's one thing. Second, real quick tidbit for you. Kind of like what we talked about with the rolling chords. Let one hand lead the other hand. The breaking apart of hands in scale passages that are in parallel is usually due to one hand not being able to keep up with the other. So identify the weaker hand and make the weaker hand the leader, not the stronger hand. Okay, let me go back to Bedlington Groomer's question, and this is going to be the last one. They asked, what is it about the first movement of the Moonlight Sonata that is difficult to play musically? Oh my. Okay, I will try to keep this relatively short. Here we are. Not the most, it's not a Henley score, but it's what we have. Handy. Okay. This piece, the melody is so simple, right? Bar after bar of G sharp, then just a step and a step and a step, a little skip and a resolution. Let's just talk about that. The whole rest of the piece is going to fall into the kind of the same category as this first melodic statement. Okay. If we just talk about the melody, how do you make one pitch so interesting? And it all has to do with phrasing, articulation, and color. So it's not just ding, ding, ding. It's not three notes. That's the tricky thing. Is a lot of times students get to the point and they play this, and one, they play it too fast. we have something like that, which is just very plain. It doesn't say anything emotionally. But this, slowing the tempo down, which requires a lot of control, playing really, truly pianissimo, and still having all of the pitches articulate. That takes a tremendous amount of control to keep all of that, the triplet figure, really quiet, keep the left hand voicing good, meaning we're probably voicing the bottom note of the left hand the most, not the middle, not the upper, but the bottom. And keeping the focus on the fifth finger in the right hand. The second thing is, this phrase is only, let's say, 4 bars long. But it's so slow that, again, going back to the concept I showed everybody in my last video on the channel, the thread. This phrase is, we have to hear the continuity from note to note over very long spans of time. Because once a dotted half note sounds at the piano, it's going away naturally. We don't have any control over that. But our mind and our inner ear needs to hear it as if it's being sung or bowed or something like that, not going away, but continuing forward to that point. And then it gets easier when we have notes every 2 beats. And then the easiest notes every beat. Yeah. Now that's just one phrase. We begin in C sharp minor, right? Next phrase. This has intrinsically a completely different character to it because of the change in harmony. So we need to understand that character also means a change in tone for the melody. This is the first time we have a dominant chord. Sorry, not the first time, but a dominant chord over an extended period. Major, minor, diminished. There's so much tension there. Every single note, there aren't that many notes, but every single one of them has so much importance. And if we play it well, it should leave someone breathless. It shouldn't be a piece of music that puts us to sleep, right? It should be a piece that is so intensely emotional that the audience, we as performers, make the audience hold their breath for the duration. They're afraid to move. They're afraid that their chair is going to squeak and ruin it. And a really great performance is going to capture all of these things. The emotion that's in each pitch, the line from one note to the next, the extreme separation of the different layers in the piece of music, the bass and the accompaniment texture and the melody. And despite how slow the piece is, it's never going to feel boring. It's never going to feel no one will ever feel anxious for the piece to be over. And if we can accomplish all of those things, we're playing the piece well. That is why a lot of people play Moonlight Sonata when they're the first movement, when they're level, 4 or 5-ish. And I wouldn't expect almost any of those things to be able to be accomplished at that level of musicianship. So there we go. I think that'll wrap it up. Rotzi says, don't forget to play us off the stream since you said you needed a warm up. Okay. Something short. It'll be a Christmas thing since it's December. Yeah, I'll play you something. Okay, so yeah, we'll close it out today. If you haven't given that thumbs up, please give a thumbs up to the video. This is one of my Christmas arrangements, and yeah, stay tuned in for as long as you want. It's about 4 or 5 minutes, and I'll probably just sign off when it's over. So thank you all for being here, and I'll see you in 2 weeks. 2 weeks from today. See if you can guess the two pieces. This is a medley of two pieces that they're not normally presented this way. Can you guess the two pieces in the medley? Good. We got some great guesses in there. Awesome. You were correct. Beautiful. All right, everybody, practice smarter, not harder. And yes, Rhodesy, Sir Woolsey's got a great answer for that. All right. I will see you in 2 weeks, everybody. Have a great couple weeks in December. And see you next time.